Hey guys, how's everybody doing? I hope you're all doing okay. It, man, I can't believe that it's already November. Here we are on November 7th as I sit here recording this video, which means we are a couple page turns away from holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and just can't believe all that's on us again. Seems to come around every 3 or 4 months, not every 12 months. I do like Thanksgiving. It's probably my favorite holiday. We get to recognize and give thanks for what God has given to us, and it's just a time to gather together and gather around nice meals and just enjoy family and friends, and no pressure to be buying gifts or trying to find things for everybody that they like or want, and it's just it's one of the low pressure holidays, and that's why I really like it. And I love having the family around, just gathering all the kids and grandkids. It's like nothing better. And I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving, but I just can't believe that it's here already. The evidence of it is all the leaves in my front yard. If anybody needs something to do, I got plenty of leaves that need to be raked up if you're bored. Just kidding, but I do have an extra rake if anybody takes me up on the offer. Today I'm going to talk about we're still in our study of Revelation, and I'm going to continue with that, but I'm going to kind of start somewhere else. There's a couple points. Excuse me while I do a little maintenance here on my got a fishing reel trying to attack me here. Um, yeah, I want to make a couple points that I think are significant, and one point in particular that I think just needs to be really clear for all of us because it's easy to get into concerns or have questions about certain things like is it possible for me to take the mark of the beast, which is from our study in Revelation? Is it possible to do that by accident? And if so, it's like people, they have a question about that, and they also will raise a question: is it possible for me to commit the unpardonable sin, and just put myself in a place where God can't forgive me? Is it possible to do that by accident? Or, and it's a scary question. It's a serious question. And we're going to deal with the question of the mark of the beast today a little bit. Now, in order to get there, we're going to start at the beginning, Genesis 1. It's interesting. It's no accident that the Bible starts with those three words, in the beginning. I believe if you really want to understand the Bible, you want to understand biblical theology or the biblical story, and you really want to get it down and wrap your head around it, you have to start with those three words, in the beginning. There's a reason that the Bible starts with those three words. Have you ever have you ever turned on a movie? Maybe you're just turning the TV on and it opens up to a movie and it looks pretty good. It looks like, man, this is probably a pretty good movie, but I missed the first 15 minutes or the first 10 or 20 minutes. And so you don't know what's going on. You're trying to put the pieces together. You see different characters doing different things and saying different things, and without understanding what happened in the beginning of that movie, it's really hard to understand the context of the movie. You have to try to speculate and try to assume or fabricate or synthesize some understanding of what you think this movie is about because you missed the premise. I think the Bible's the same way. If you don't start in the beginning to understand the premise, you can get into all kinds of weird speculation, weird synthesis, um, which translates into, I think, errant doctrines and errant understandings. So, in order to understand, and we're going to end up in Revelation, but we kind of have to establish a couple things here. In Genesis 1, we are starting with the beginning, and we know what happened. You know, God starts creation and starts making plants and animals and light and creation. He's just bringing creation into existence. And in Genesis 1:26, God says, and this is kind of like God saying, I have, this is the part of my idea here. Let's make man in our image and let them rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. That's all one sentence. God says, let's make man and let him rule. That, there's intent, there's objective and goals, all wrapped up in that sentence, and all wrapped up. And you have to understand, we have to understand God's intention. Let's make man, not let's make an ethnicity, or let's make some men. I have an idea. Think how absurd this would be. God said, I have an idea. Let's make man and throw some of them in the lake of the fire. We need fuel for the fire. So we'll create some of them for the lake of fire, and we'll create others to rule. That's not what he did. That's not what he said. He said, let's make man, all man, and let them rule. So if you are part of mankind, if you are part of the human race, you were created to rule. You were created with a destiny, with a goal in mind. God had a goal and a purpose for creating mankind. And it's stated right here. And we have to get that clear in our minds. It was the goal of all mankind to rule over God's creation. Now we know it got really messed up. And then because of that, ethnicities were created, and Israel in particular created for a purpose, for the purpose of bringing man back to their original intent. Because through Israel and through the seed of Abraham, God was going to redeem the corruption and the fallenness that man brought into the original purpose. But the goal was create man and let him rule. We can think of this as our created right. We were created in the image of God. It's that image of God that gives us it qualifies us to rule his creation. He didn't just make man or make people in some foreign image, some other than godly fashion, and tell them to go rule his precious creation. The creation, the Bible tells us his creation was made for his pleasure. So he created something in his likeness, in his image, to rule it, not something outside of his image. And these concepts are important. So if you are part of mankind, you were created in the image of God for the purpose of ruling his creation. That is your created right, your created purpose. We could think of it as a birthright. You're born into the human race. You're born with a birthright to rule and govern the creation, govern the nations. Now we gave it up, and we all know that. We're not going to get too much into that, but your birthright, the Bible has a lot to say about birthright. And birthright can be squandered. It can be lost. We've got examples of that. If we look at Genesis 25, I'm going to be reading quite a bit of scripture because this is not just like my opinion. I think this is what the Bible teaches, and so I want us to see it in God's Word. And so I'm going to use the scripture quite a bit today. You have to forgive me while I'm flipping pages and finding things, but in Genesis 25, verse 30, we have the story of Jacob and Esau. When Esau had been out in the field, he was hunting. Esau was an avid hunter, so he was out hunting and wore himself out. The Bible says he comes in from the field and he sees Jacob, who's making some stew. And he says to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I'm famished." And therefore his name was called Edom, which means red. But Jacob said, "Well, first sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die. What use is my birthright to me?" And Jacob makes him swear to give up his birthright, because Esau was a little older than Jacob. And so he was, by biblical rights, biblical standards, the birthright of the firstborn belongs to Esau. And so Jacob coerced him, tricked him, however you want to think of it, into surrendering his birthright. So a birthright can be surrendered, or it can be lost. In Genesis 35, we have a story of Jacob. Jacob now is traveling through the land and running from Esau and working for his father-in-law and different things before the nation of Israel is established. And let's see, Genesis 35, verse 22. It came about. Let me go here before I read this. Jacob has had his children now. He's had some sons. Reuben is his firstborn. And Reuben should have had the birthright. Reuben is Jacob's firstborn son. And so the birthright, the right to get a double portion of inheritance, because that's what the firstborn God received in the Bible. When the inheritance of a father was being split up, the firstborn, because of his birthright, received twice as much as everybody else. And he became the new ruler of the family. He became the new patriarch of the family. That was the birthright. It was acquired strictly by birth order. Just like our right to rule is created strictly by being created and born into the human race. It's a God-given right. The birthright was created by God, given to the firstborn. He did nothing to earn it. It was just his right as the firstborn son. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn son. Should have had the birthright. Reuben messes up. It says in Genesis 35:22, "It came about while Israel was dwelling in the land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel," or Jacob, "heard of it." Now we fast forward to the time when Jacob is about to die, and he's speaking prophecies and blessings over his sons. He comes to Reuben. This is in Genesis 49. Jacob assembles his sons. He calls them all together so that he can pronounce blessing on them and kind of prophesy to them. And he starts with Reuben. the firstborn. It says, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. He's the oldest son and was a, a predominant figure. He by all rights should have been the firstborn. Jacob goes on and he says, but you're uncontrolled as water. You shall not have preeminence because you went up to your father's bed and then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. This is referring back to the time to Genesis 35 when he slept with his father's concubine. So he squandered his birthright. He lost it by being foolish and falling into sin. So your birthright can be surrendered, like Esau just gave his up to Jacob. Your birthright can be squandered through foolishness, as Reuben's was, by sleeping with his father's concubine. He lost his birthright. Your birthright can also just be corrupted. We have a story of Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son, really, and he should have, by all rights, he should have had the birthright over Isaac, but Ishmael's birthright was corrupted because he was the son of a concubine. It says, in Genesis 21, verse 9, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, which is Ishmael's mother. It was actually Sarah's servant, whom she gave to Abraham and told him to have a son with Hagar, which he then did. But then later on, God opens Sarah's womb and gives her a son, Isaac. And so now there's jealousy in the camp. Sarah doesn't like Hagar and her son. When she saw Hagar, the Egyptian, whom had born to Abraham, she saw Hagar and the son whom she had born to Abraham. She says to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be in heir with my son. In other words, he's not going to receive, not only is he not going to receive the birthright of the firstborn, Sarah's getting rid of him so he doesn't even receive part of the inheritance. So although Ishmael was Abraham's firstborn son and should have been in line for the birthright, he didn't receive it because his birth was corrupted, we might say it that way. The point is that birthright can be lost through corruption. Hagar was not Abraham's wife. She was just a handmaid, a servant. We know that he shouldn't have been having children with her, and so it was a corrupted birth. It was a corrupted line that was produced there, and so because of that, even God told Abraham, when Abraham asked him to consider Ishmael, God said Ishmael will not, he cannot be the heir of the promise. He cannot receive the birthright. It has to go to Ishmael. So birthrights can be corrupted, and that's an important point because the enemy knows that. So what we have, going back to the beginning, is God creating mankind, and because he's created him in his image to be part of this human family that was created by design to rule creation, the enemy knows that, and one of his strategies is to corrupt that image. We're going to corrupt the bloodline, corrupt the DNA even, if you will. And you know where I'm going with this. We're going back to Genesis 6. What happened? Well, the enemy had a strategy. He thought, you know what, we can thwart the plan of God to have man rule creation. I believe the New Testament tells us that the angels got jealous. The celestial beings, the non-human created beings, the heavenly family of God, however you want to think about that. I tend to refer to them as divine, meaning they don't have a body. They're divine beings. Not, it doesn't mean righteous and good. It just means spiritual beings. The spiritual family of God got jealous when God created his human family to rule the planet. So they set their designs on destroying that plan. One of the first, one of the first step was for Satan to deceive Adam and Eve into sin. And that was actually quite successful. But God comes up with a plan then to redeem that. Biblical prophecy and eschatology, the end time plan of God, started right away. I could argue that it started in Genesis 1 when God said, let us make man to rule. That's eschatology. That's where it's all headed. Certainly in chapter 3 of Genesis, when he promises the serpent that he's going to, through the woman's seed, he's going to create a man who's going to destroy the serpent or step on his head, symbolically saying that he's going to overcome you and restore the original plan. That's eschatology. That's the biblical story. It doesn't start with Israel or anywhere else. It starts right there. That's the goal. God's going to restore mankind. So now the enemy's aware of that. What can he do? Well, I can corrupt mankind. How can I do that? Well, it came about in Genesis 6 when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God, those spiritual beings that were there when God created everything, saw the daughters of men and thought they were attractive, they were beautiful. And so they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. And God said, my spirit will not thrive with man forever, because he also is flesh. So his days will be 120 years. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. They were on the earth in the days of the flood, because this is what this is leading up to. It's the flood. And we'll talk briefly about that in a minute. The Nephilim were there in those days, the days of the flood, and also afterwards. Now there's a little bit of speculation about how did they survive the flood, or how did they get on the other side of the flood. A couple theories about that. We don't need to go into those right now. But these were the mighty men of old, men of renown. This hybrid race of people, if you will, men, hybrid, part human and part divine. I know that word can bring some confusion, but it just means that they're spiritual. They were not human. They were created other than human. They mixed, and they corrupted the bloodline. And along with that, the attempt was to corrupt the birthright. Let's corrupt their created birthright so that they can't rule, because it's the image of God that qualifies them to rule. If we can destroy or corrupt that image, we can disqualify them from being the ones to rule the creation. I happened to turn the TV on one day and the History Channel came up, because some of the things we watch are on that channel, but it also has this program about ancient aliens on there, and it's all these scientists trying to discover whether or not aliens were actually ever on the earth and interacted with mankind. They come up with some fascinating discoveries. And actually, what they don't understand is that they're proving the Bible. Not only proving the Bible, they're proving extra biblical literature like 1 Enoch, and the whole idea that there actually were beings who came to the earth and corrupted mankind and corrupted their thinking, taught them things that they otherwise would not have known, how to ferment and how to make vessels of war or implements of war. And in one particular segment of the show, they actually said that they corrupted the DNA of mankind. They actually were saying that this alien in their mind, in their term, the alien DNA and the human DNA were commingled and corrupted human DNA. Well, what's that doing? That's corrupting the image of God, because you're no longer pure human. Your image, the image of God in those individuals is corrupted. And let me just say, this is the reason, because those beings, the offspring of those beings, remained after the flood, the Nephilim. Bible talks about them in different ways, and all the ancient cultures have different names for them. The Apkallu, the Zinzumin, and the Bible calls them Anak, are the sons of Anak, and the Nephilim, and the giants. When Israel first spies out the land that God's bringing them back to, they come back with this report that the land is full of giants. We can't possibly go in there. There's big things in there, big beings that we're no match for them. That's because they really saw big beings. And so when God has to correct Israel and bring them back around with Joshua now as their leader and lead them into the land, God says when you go into some of these cities, you have to completely wipe it out. Men, women, and children. Destroy every living thing in it. You can keep some of the animals, but you have to kill every woman and child and man there. And this is problematic for some people. They're like, why would God be so vicious? I've had people question me, why was he so mad and so mean in the Old Testament? Well, the reason is because what he was doing was telling Joshua, destroy the corrupted bloodline, destroy this corrupted image. They have no right to be on creation. They have no future. They cannot govern creation. They are not made in the image of God. It's a corrupted image, and so their birthright has been corrupted. It's been lost and squandered, and the flood was an attempt to wipe them out. The flood was an attempt to cleanse the land, to cleanse the earth of this corrupted bloodline, this corrupted DNA. And like the Bible says, some of them survived it. They were on the earth before and after the flood. So now Joshua was commissioned with the task of wipe them out. We got to get them out of here because it's a corrupted bloodline. It explains God's insistence and on just killing everybody there, and it explains, why he's so, what would I say, adamant. He's uncompromising on this, and you could read it and say, well, he appears to be mean. He's not being mean. He's trying to bring things back to their original purpose. He's trying to get rid of this corrupted bloodline. I'm looking for a verse here that I want to read just to prove this point. There's in Deuteronomy 3, Moses is kind of recounting some of the story of Israel's travels through the wilderness and everything, and he's trying to encourage Israel and telling them to remember things. And he says, remember, so the Lord our God delivered Og, who was the king of Bashan or Bashan. He was one of the big giants. Moses said, he's delivered him into our hand, and we killed him. We left no survivors. And then we went into these other fortified cities where there were other big beings. And it says in verse 6, we utterly destroyed them as we did to Sihon, king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men, women, and children of every city. And then we see Joshua being commissioned later on with the same kind of strategy. It's because of the corrupted DNA, the corrupted bloodline. God was making an attempt to cleanse the earth of this corruption. It was the enemy's strategy to deprive man of his birthright, his created birthright, by corrupting the image of God in mankind. And that's a point that we have to kind of hold on to. So now if we kind of fast forward to the New Testament, we know that image was corrupted, and most of us likely don't have alien DNA. So our birthright is not corrupted through that commingling of the sons of God with the daughters of men. But our birthright was lost because of sin. It was squandered through our foolishness, if you want to think of it that way, as Reuben's was, because we've all sinned. The Bible tells us we've all fallen short, we've all sinned. And so our right to rule was lost. Our birthright, if you want to take it that way, was actually lost. But God had a plan to restore it. And that's exactly what happens in the New Testament. And I want to read from Romans 8, very familiar verses, I believe, very misunderstood verses. Romans 8, and Romans is Paul's recap of the whole plan of redemption, in my opinion. Paul's kind of telling the story from beginning to end, talking about the time when God actually gave the nations over to their sin because they just insisted on following after their own folly and their own foolishness. And so it says that Paul says God just gave them over to it. And that's a whole nother part of the story. He still has a plan. He picks Israel out of all the nations. He chooses to make a people through which he can work to restore redemption and the birthright to all of mankind. He chooses Israel, and he chooses the geography of Israel through which to bring this redemptive purpose, the restoration of his original intent. And that's why I say it's so important. If you want to understand his story, you have to start at the beginning. His original purpose was to create man and let man rule his creation. He wasn't creating anything. It was all of mankind. And that's what Paul's message is in Romans and Galatians and everywhere else. It's always been the purpose of God to bring everybody into his family, all of mankind. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good, for those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. What's his purpose? To create man and let them rule his creation. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be firstborn among many brethren. Now that's a bunch. That's a mouthful. Those whom he foreknew, he predestined. Who did he predestine? Well, let's go back right from the beginning. Let's make man and let them rule. Sounds to me like man was predestined to rule. Man was predestined to bear the image of God, to bear the image of his Son. It was lost, and so God's plan is to restore it to mankind. Now there's a component of faith that enters in, and there's a component of surrender. All of mankind was predestined to be the family of God. All of man was. It's kind of like there's a party. You're all invited to the party, but you won't all come. I know you're not going to, and God knows who will come and who won't come. But all of man was made in the image of God to rule creation. And so these verses are not suggesting that God has determined that some will come and some won't. He's not on an individual level. He's already determined everybody's invited. You were all made for this purpose. You're all made for this reason. Now, does he know that some people are not going to receive it? And yes, he does. He's omnipotent. He's omniscient. He knows everything. But he's not determining who's part of the family and who is not. Everybody was predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. We lost that, and it has to be restored. Jesus came to restore that image so that he could be the firstborn among many brethren. God's still looking for that family. He still wants that human family. And those who he predestined, he called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he glorifies. Yeah, he does all that. He does it all. It's all the work of God because we squandered it. We lost it. God got involved and did everything necessary to restore us back to the original intent of being made in his image, conformed to his image, and rule the nation, rule the nations, or rule the planet. Verse 31 of Romans 8 says, well, then what shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? What's Paul's conclusion? He's telling you why he just said all those things he just said about God being the one to justify and glorify. Because his point, he's trying to make the point that if God did all of that, and it proves that he's for us, who can be against us? He's encouraging his readers with these thoughts. Verse 32, he says, he didn't even spare his own Son, but delivered him over for us all, so that we could all come back into the family. How will he not also with him freely give us all things? Paul's just making the point, look what God did. He did everything, man. He provided the sacrifice. He didn't spare his Son. And then through faith, he's going to call you. He's going to justify you. He's going to glorify you. Why? What is he doing here? He's restoring our birthright. He's restoring our right to rule the nations. He's qualifying us to share in his rightful inheritance because he's the one who fulfilled the plan of God to be a flawless human, a submitted human. He's the one who fulfilled that plan and earned the right to be to receive the nations as his inheritance. And the New Testament tells us that he qualifies us to share in that inheritance. He makes it so that we can be restored to the original plan of ruling and governing the land. So what is Satan going to do with that? He's going to try to corrupt it again. That's all he has left, because Christ has done everything else, and he can't beat that. He can't overcome the plan of God without some kind of deviant plan. He can't, because he just can't take God on head to head necessarily and win. So he's got to come up with his other plan. I just want to read this verse to you because it's what I was talking about. It's in Colossians 1, verse 12. Paul says, we should give thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. So there we have that idea in Scripture that Jesus is the one who qualified us. Verse 15 of Colossians 1 says, he is the image of the invisible God. We got all this image talk and the restoration of image. In Romans 8, it says that God predestined us to be conformed to that image. We were made in that image. It got corrupted and lost and squandered. And now Jesus has come back to restore that image because he is that image. He is the image of a Son of God. And we have to be restored to that image to be qualified to govern the nations and govern the land. What's the enemy's plan? Well, now we're going to finish up in Revelation, which is what we're actually studying. In Revelation, there's just some thoughts here, and they come from 13 and 14 still. I know we've kind of been sitting on these couple chapters here for a while. I had hoped to move on to 15, but I thought, this is such an interesting point, and I'm going to get a little bit into speculation here before I quit. I don't normally like to do that. I like to just stick with the scriptures, but I think there's some interesting speculation about where things are headed, and I think it's good that we kind of understand these things. But in Revelation 13 and 14, we have all this talk about this beast, a couple beasts. We got a dragon, we know to be the devil, because the Bible told us that he's the dragon is the devil of old. Then we got a couple beasts. One of them is John describes as coming up out of the sea, and another one coming up out of the earth. And the dragon gives power to these beasts. Now, what these beasts are, whether they're human or not, I don't know for sure. I tend to think that maybe they are. And maybe the beast is, we have a false prophet and we have an antichrist who show up on the scene, and maybe these beasts are representing those two human characters. Regardless, there's great power given to them. And in Revelation 13:14, it says, that they deceive those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast. There's all kinds of fantastic power and even miraculous power given to these beast creatures, whether they're men or whatever. And it says it was in verse 15 of chapter 13, it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak, and causes many who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So there's this image worship that's talked about here. We got to worship the beast and his image. In chapter 14, verse 9, there's these angels who are showing up and giving announcements, and a third angel shows up in verse 9, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God. This talk of image, I think, is significant. We started with the image of God and mankind being created in that image. We talked about how the image can be, you know, it's associated with your birthright, with your created right. You have, our Constitution talks about inalienable rights, meaning they come from God. God gives certain rights to mankind. The founders of our Constitution understood that and tried to put together a governing document that recognized certain rights coming from God and protected those rights and said that nobody should be allowed to discard those or rescind or violate certain rights that we all have. And so they recognize the idea that humans, all men, according to our Constitution, all men are created equal with certain rights. All men created by God are given rights by God. So our founding fathers even recognized that. Satan recognizes it. Well, he wants to take those rights away. How can he do that? He can corrupt the bloodline. He attempted to do that in Genesis 6. Why? In verse 9 here it says, if anyone worships the beast and his image, then they're going to suffer the consequences and drink of the wrath of God. So why, if this beast is a being, why does it talk about his image? We tend to think of an image as a picture or a hologram or something. It is interesting to me that it says, you know, that his image is given the power to speak. That sounds like some kind of technological achievement. But what I don't understand is, if the beast is there, why does he need an image? Why does he need a picture? Or why does he need a hologram? Why does he need anything other than, why wouldn't you just offer worship directly to the being? So that suggests to me that the image is speaking of something more, perhaps, I don't know the right way to say it, something other than a picture, something other than a computer image. I think it's speaking of an image that's other than the image of God. There's an image that comes from the corrupted image of the beast, a corrupted image of a satanic image. You know, it's interesting to me that the first commandment is, thou shalt not make any graven images. You can't worship any other image other than the image of God. We see in Revelation here that people are going to worship a different image. They're going to worship an image of a beast. I believe, and this is where I'm going to get into a little bit of speculation, because just in listening to some of the people talk about artificial intelligence and some of the things that are coming down the pike, there's going to be pressure on humanity to conform to the image of AI, to receive, if you will, technological changes to the human image, if I can just say it that way. I don't want to name any of these guys, but there are, you know, some of these big computer guru, rich and powerful oligarch billionaires. One of them even has roots in St. Louis, who is now a partner with another one who builds rockets in trying to create artificial intelligence, and they're racing for what they call artificial general intelligence, which signifies when artificial intelligence becomes equal with human intelligence. And then beyond that is artificial superior intelligence, when artificial intelligence becomes smarter than all humans, smarter than all human intelligence combined. That's what they're racing for, and their goal is to actually create a godlike entity that will, and by their own admission, they don't know if they're going to be able to control it once it gets to that point. So it will be, in some senses, superior to man, um, and will be able to command worship or obedience, because many things can be subjected to it, including currency. Digital currency, cryptocurrency, whatever you want to think of it, is nothing more than uh, computer generated currency. Uh, it's blockchain currency. It's um, it's cryptic, or cryptocurrency, in a sense that it's just really numbers, but because of that, it's traceable and it's manageable. It's not like you carry a dollar bill in your pocket and you can drop it on a counter and spend it somewhere. Now you have to spend digital money, which means it's all part of a big computer system, and it's traceable. They know exactly who has it, and they'll know exactly when you're trying to spend it, and so it will be very easy to regulate. And they can tell you where, when, and if you can spend that currency. What's that sound like? To me, that sounds like a time when um, he causes the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. That sounds very much like where these guys want to take us. These guys being those oligarchs I mentioned or referred to. They want to take us to this place. And then one of the other things they talk about is that in order to keep up with technology, in order to keep up with this super intelligence that they're trying to create, mankind's going to have to be modified. One of these guys is actually talking and saying, and it's actually the guy with the St. Louis roots, that humans will have a choice to either be conformed, to either conform and receive technological changes to their DNA through the insertion of computer components or chips. You'll be faced with either doing that or becoming extinct. And that's really their position on the future. And oh yeah, by the way, the future in their mind is 2030, or as close as they can get to 2030. So it's close, and the idea, the pressure will be that, well, if you don't do this, computer intelligence is going to leave you in the dust, and you're not going to be able to compete in a world where other people are literally being connected to the intelligence or the information of the internet. You won't be able to compete if you don't do that. And oh, by the way, you won't be able to buy and sell. You won't be able to go in and buy food and all that stuff. So there's going to be great pressure to conform. And what is this doing again? Going back to our original premise, it's corrupting the image. It's destroying the image of God. Just like the guys on the History Channel said that these alien beings came down and corrupted man's DNA. They corrupted the image of man. They didn't use those terms, but they did say they corrupted the DNA. the next attempt, I'm speculating here a little bit, but I believe this to be true. The next attempt to corrupt human DNA is going to come through this technological pathway. There's going to be tremendous pressure to become part man and part technology, corrupted DNA. Why? Well, for one, they can control us, but for two, it will strip us of our birthright. Now, here's an important point. Verse 9 says, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark. That word receives is lambano in the Greek, and it means to willingly take to yourself for your own use. There's a choice being made here. It's not forced on anybody. It's not done through accident. There's a willful reception, a willful taking up. The word just over and over again just used to refer to willingly and freely taking something to yourself. That's what lambano means, and that's what the word John used or was instructed to use, however it worked, in this verse. So there's a willingness or a willful taking up of something that has to do with the image of the beast. And I think it's going to be just that clear, that people are going to know that I need to adhere to the image of God. I will not surrender my birthright by worshiping this other image or becoming part of this other image, even if it means I starve to death, or I believe that God will feed me, whatever your faith, allows you to believe, or whether or not they're going to destroy us or kill us. Verse 12 of 14 says, here is the perseverance of the saints who keep the commandments of God in their faith in Jesus. There's perseverance through this stuff. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be, it's going to be stressful if they say, well, look, if you don't do this, you can't get a job and you can't buy or sell anything. That's pressure. Here is the perseverance of the saints. Keep the commandments of God and keep your faith in Christ. What's the short of the long? It's all God. I believe God is kind of showing us and letting us know that there's going to be another play on mankind to corrupt the image of God. You can do this through sin. We can do this through foolishness. We can surrender it ourselves like Esau did. But Satan also makes attempts at corrupting that image in us, as he did in Genesis 6. And I believe he's going to make another end time play to corrupt the image again by forcing mankind to take another image, forcing them to become part of another image and corrupting the image of God, and therefore surrendering their birthright. And those who want to hold to the commandments and hold to faith in Christ are going to have to persevere. They're going to have to push through that. That's what I think the story of Revelation is telling us. And what we see after this is when the world comes to this place and people have made their choices, then in verse 14, John says, then I looked, and behold, a white cloud. And sitting on the cloud was one like a son of man, having a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel comes out of the temple, saying, put your sickle in and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is ripe. It makes a lot of sense to me that when everybody's been faced with this choice, and they've made their choices, the earth is ripe for harvest. It's time. Put in the sickle. You might hear my grandfather clock chiming in the background. It's actually 11 o'clock in the morning. The earth is ripe for harvest. Everybody's kind of made their call, and uh, Satan has made his play. He's made his attempt at corrupting the image of God, which is, man, let's go back to the beginning. It was God's original goal and his original intent. Let's make man in our image. Satan's like, let's destroy that image. We're going to bring people to the point, they're either going to receive it or not. And when it's all said and done, God looks at the earth and says, it's ripe. Let's go harvest the earth. And then what happens? Great wrath is poured out on the beast. Great wrath is poured out on the dragon, and great wrath is poured out on those who decided to embrace the image of the dragon rather than embrace and continue in the image of God. I hope this stuff is fun for you guys. It's kind of fun. Some of it we talked about before. I understand that. I think it's just really important to try to understand the biblical story for what it's saying. From start to finish, it's what it's saying. God creates man to in his image to rule his creation. That gets messed up, and God comes up with a plan to restore the original goal. It's pretty much that simple. There's a lot of side stories and nuances and things to tease out and work out in that whole thing. But in essence, that's the story. And we see the celebration at the end. The tabernacle of God comes down out of heaven, and the presence of God now dwells with man the way it was supposed to. And man is restored through Christ, and with Christ as the firstborn among the brothers, we are restored to the point of ruling the creation with him. Start to finish, it's the same story. It's important for us to realize that. It's important for us to realize that you're not going to accidentally mess up and receive a mark that's going to disqualify you. It's something that has to be received. It has to be embraced. Taken up is the idea. You have to actually like take it up and accept, yes, I will do this. People doing are going to know that they're abandoning their human birthright, their humanity, and they're becoming, these guys want to refer to us as humans 2.0. You will know you are becoming something other than what God made you to be and what your original intent was, what he predetermined and predestined you to be. You can give it up, but it was predetermined that you would be created in his image and rule the nations. It was predetermined that all of us would do that. Some people are squandering it and giving it up. I've talked too long. I'm sorry. I didn't think this would go this long. Hope you guys, put it on 1.5 speed or 1.25 speed or something. You'll get through it in a reasonable amount of time. Hope you guys have a blessed rest of the day, a good weekend. Hope to see many of you over the weekend. And just love you guys and look forward to